G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. Welcome everyone. Today I'm interviewing Louise Karch from Word Glue, based in Melbourne. Thanks for your time today, Louise.
It's great to be talking to you and your small business community.
Yeah, thank you. Now, how we know each other. So a bit of a twist and turn of a story here, but Hazel McTavish West down here in Hobart, who's the founder of Seed Lab, an exciting kind of incubator in the food business sector down here, gave your book to a few of my friends, Matthew Will from now M2 Logistics here in Tasmania, Tony Kibbe, who's had on the podcast as a subject matter expert on marketing, and Matthew earlier on, I think it was episode 3 of the podcast, and they all raved about your book and thought you'd be great to have on the cast.
Well, thank you, and thanks to them.
So tell our audience a bit about your business, what it does and how it makes money.
What it does and how it makes money is all leaders at some point have to name something. And I make sure in the attention economy that their brand name is going to break out, not blend in. A name will take you a long distance if it's the right name. It will do the heavy lifting for you. But if you get the name wrong, that can cost you over time. So absolutely. I have doubled people's incomes when I've renamed them.
Yeah, it's a phenomenally powerful thing, just what name you start out with. There's a car wash business down here in Tasmania, just shits me every time I drive past it because it's spelled car with a K and wash, W-O-S-H, and it just grates against me every time. You know, you should have the names that can be easily pronounced and searched online, etc., and not mangle the English languages from what I've read in many marketing books.
Although it's driving you crazy every time you go by it, so you're noticing it every time. So they are using one of the principles of naming, and that is you need to full focus, and they're certainly doing that. I wouldn't say they're doing it right, but they are doing it.
Yeah, but as a grammar snob, I guess I refuse to drive in there for that reason.
Well, there you go. They're losing clients because they're not speaking to you as a consumer.
That's right, yeah. I can't remember which, I think it was The Brand Gap, Martin Neumeier's book that I read in that, or it might have been his follow-up book, Zag, just how important the name of a business is or brand names are. I assume you're a fan of Marty.
I am, and I think it's his book, Zigzag. I can't remember the exact title, but Zag. Yeah, that's a great book.
Yeah. Great. And tell the audience how you started out.
Well, I started out, I've been naming things since I was a little kid. I just love words, and I come from a very nerdy, wordy family. And when I came to Australia, I realized my business model didn't work here. So I had formerly been in outplacement management, where folks have lost their jobs. They get a package to either find another job or start a new business. And I love that work. So I was branding individuals. And when I came here, I realized that's not going to work. I need another business model. And I started doing branding because I was very familiar with branding. And then I realized quite quickly nobody was owning a niche. And as a small business person, if you can find a smallest viable audience, an SVA, to serve in a remarkable way, people will talk about you. And because I'd done some naming, I thought that's a niche I can own. And I wrote a book so I can own the expertise. It's now won 5 awards around the world, which is ridiculously cool. And I'm now known as an expert in naming in this country. So there's a whole lot of steps there that I took to own a category.
Yeah, great. Well, congratulations. That's phenomenal. Speaking of naming, do you want to name your book? And so the audience will link through to it in the show notes. People will be able to check it out.
Yeah, so the book is called Word Glue, Find Your $1 Million Brand Name. It's only available through me, and that's wordglue.co is where you go to find it.
Great. And you've got working on a second book now?
I am, and it's on taglines because Dr. Wayne Mortensen, who's one of the Blue Ocean Strategy guys. Blue Ocean Strategy is one of the best-selling books that Harvard Business Press has ever done. I think it might be their #1. And they say a brand needs to have a strong market focus. So like the Dollar Shave Club, They chose to be a subscription razor company. And then it needs to stand out from the competition. So they were a subscription, but they're also funny. The CEO had studied comedy. And so all his videos were funny and on point. And then you need a strategic tagline. They had two: shave time, shave money, and our blades are effing great. So Dr. Wayne Morton said, Louise, I've got clients who have a name. What they need is a strategic, compelling tagline. Write that book. And when a Dr. Wayne says jump, you just jump. So that book will be ready in February, and I'm happy to talk to you about them because there's some really cool stuff about taglines and names that people need to know in the attention economy.
Yep, great. And I've actually got a quote here from Marty Neumeyer from one of his books. It's an ironic fact of marketing. The brand's most valuable asset is often the one given the least attention, its name. A poor name is a drag on the branding building. A poor name is a drag on the brand building process, and a good name accelerates it. When I read that, obviously wrote it down. I thought that's just gold.
That should be in my book. Can you send me that quote?
I will.
I'll put it in the next edition. That's a really good one.
Yeah, no, maybe open the book with it. It's a great one. So maybe explain to me once why naming is so important, and any examples you can use to illustrate how you've worked with people and helped them.
Naming matters because you're competing against Coca-Cola's $2 billion marketing budget, and you can't outspend Coca-Cola. Your name is going to carry value over time. And so you might make up your name like Rolex did or Haagen-Dazs did. Your name, if it doesn't sound right, it's going to stop people right at the beginning. I named a Canadian tech company. They got my book, and they're a startup. So they're in startup mode. They can't hire me for the full package. So we did a little consulting program with them. They generated a whole bunch of names, and they got really excited about one called that was Becomble. So when you say Becomble, what happens to you when you say it?
Well, I kind of stumble through it, and I wouldn't know how to spell it when I'm searching it either.
Yeah. So Becomble sounds like you're falling, and it just doesn't feel right. It's got the wrong mouthfeel. So sound symbolism matters. The name of the word wasn't carrying their essence. And what they actually do is they lift young people up by giving them access to career mentors so they make better decisions. What we came up with was Inqli, I-N-Q-L-I, which we could get the .com for. Doesn't even matter that that's the case, but just so you know. It's nice to get a .com, but not necessary anymore. But Inqli, when you say that, how do you feel when you say that?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. It sounds a lot more positive and easier to remember and find.
Right. And so when they tested it, because once you generate your name and it's trademarkable, you want to test it with your audience to see what's interesting about that name to them. Not what do they like or don't like, which I'll explain in a minute, but is it interesting enough to capture their attention? And that's what matters in the attention economy. And so it tested really well, and the young people were like, it reminds me of You Inked Me from Finding Nemo. And so it had all these positive associations. So they rode that, and it meant when they brought their brand to life, they could use ink drawings. So it gave them a name, it gave them a way to tell their story, it gave them the right feeling, which is what you want. So I can talk about the brain science of that if you want, but let me pause there and see where you'd like to go.
No, definitely. And because I was going to ask, if you'd outline the process and rough elapsed time it would take to nail a name correctly so the audience can really understand that.
Yeah, because you might be renaming your brand, you might have grown out of your name, or you might be naming a new product or offering. So let me explain the brain, and then we'll go through the process. So the brain is a filtering out machine. You are bombarded with so much stuff now. In 1972, Alvin Toffler mentioned the phrase infobesity. And that was like 50 years ago. He thought there's going to be too much information. And now we've got even double that and double that and double that again. So the brain filters stuff out all the time. So you want a brand name that's going to pull focus. On video, there's ladies who shoot their lunch. I didn't name them, but I helped them tell their story and win the Victorian Australian Marketing Institute Best New Brand for Victoria. Wow. So that name, Ladies Who Shoot Their Lunch, is completely unexpected in the wine category. So let's look at strategy. They had a strong market focus. It was a wine to go with game meat. They stood out for the competition. It was a female-facing brand. ladies who shoot their lunch with a woman on the bottle, and they had a killer tagline, pun intended, "Are you game?" So
I love that. And also that reminds me of that great, I think it must have been the 90s that came out, which was hugely commercially successful, which was, "I can't believe it's not butter."
yeah, yeah. Taglines, I mean, we can go down the tagline path.
I think that was actually the product name though.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. But it's a product name that's functioning like a tagline.
Yes.
So yeah, that's definitely a method like ladies who shoot their lunch. So the brain is a filtering out machine, and we're going to use a lot of F's here because I know you like the F word there.
Yes.
So it filters out. So you want something that's going to pull focus. Mm-hmm. And when it pulls focus, that's largely unconscious part of the brain. And then it cascades, the neurons cascade to a feeling that's also largely unconscious. So Inkly works because it pulls focus. It triggers a positive feeling. We don't really know why, but it's actually sound symbolism. And then we still have to figure out what's the story of that. So the problem is that most people name something and they go to, I like it or I don't like it, which is a figuring out process. They actually need to go, does this pull focus? Do I end up getting a feeling? And now do I start to, what happens when I start to figure this out? It's a complete reverse process that most people use to name a brand.
Yep, right. Great. And then so with the process that you take a business through, so testing is obviously very important. So how would you go about testing, like how big's the sample size?
Well, that depends on the organization. When we did it with Inkly, they had 250 young people in their database that they could ask for, and they were given credit. I can't remember what the reward system was, but they have a reward system. I mean, when I was starting out and I was working with clients that didn't have that much of a budget, I named a dental practice Smart Choice Dental because they were launching in an area with a lot of immigrants who are working multiple jobs, and they wanted their patients to feel good about choosing them. Mm-hmm. And so they chose to have a very educative process so that people always felt like they were informed consumers. So Smart Choice Dental, they weren't sure about it, but I went to a mall with a couple of friends of mine, and we just asked people, which of these what do you think of these practice names? Mm-hmm. And so we got qualitative and quantitative data about what they thought, not what they liked, but what feelings and thoughts came up when they saw that particular name. And Smart Choice Dental, even though the dentist didn't want to use it at first, not unlike Steve Jobs not wanting to use the iMac, it tested well. So you can use different processes. You just don't want to use the don't like framework because that's not how the brain works.
Yeah, great. So my father's strategy of choosing a name for his business back in the early 90s, he was a fuel distributor here in Australia, doing about 100 million litres a year when he retired. But they basically just went through the yellow pages and picked out a name that wasn't already taken. It started with A, so it was the front at the start of the yellow pages. Yeah. That was their strategy.
Yeah, and that's a strategy that's working in podcasts. Some like Seth Godin chose Akimbo for his podcast name and then his online learning platform because he knew that podcasts top of the list were seen more. So you'll have multiple. What you want to do is you want to come up with your criteria to choose the right name. You really spend some time on what are the criteria that you need to meet with your name. Yep. And that way you've got a rational process on top of an emotional one to help you make the right decision. Yep. I generate up to, I can generate 1,000 to 2,000 names to find one that's trademarkable in the country where the folks want to offer their services. So naming is a volume game.
Wow, that is a lot of names to go through. But you're right. I mean, obviously that's one of the first things you got to tick off is can you trademark and protect it? So that's a good point. Listing your criteria that's important for you, whether it needs to be able to get the .com, searchability, etc. Yeah, that's going through that process sounds very smart.
Yeah, and what I did in my book is I listed the questions you need to ask before you start name storming. So the book is designed so POW, you get the principles of naming. POP, you get the 38 naming methods. There's only 7 different kinds of names, and I'm the word nerd that discovered the 38 different practices that work around the world. So you get the story, the strategy, and the steps to generate brand names in 10 minutes or less. And then the last section, PRO, naming for prosperity, you learn about how to do a brand roadmap, how to check your legals, and develop a logo, identity, and launch.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, word nerd. I haven't heard that before, but I'll certainly be using it. Any other examples you can use to illustrate like how powerful this has been for some of the businesses you've worked with?
Yes, the first company I named, I'm a former figure skater, masters champion, actually. I don't say that to brag. I say that because that means I've had more injuries than most people.
Yeah.
And I got a Morton's neuroma, which is nerve damage between the third and fourth toe. And it can flare up so badly you feel like somebody's stabbing a knife into your foot. Like, it is incredibly painful. So I went to go see Colin Dombrowski, who is a podorthist, a foot specialist, and I was in massive amounts of pain. And he's like, what do you do? And I said, like in a really cranky kind of BITCHY way, I said, I help guys like you make more money. And he goes, how would you do that? And I said, well, the first thing I would do is rename your company. So it was called the TDG Group, which meant nothing. And this bright man who was about to finish his PhD in this area was being beaten out by franchises with less experience than he had. So that was hurting him from a psychological perspective and his bottom line. So he was really reluctant to trust me because the thing with naming is you feel like it's your baby, you should be able to name it.
Yep.
And when you can't name it, you feel so frustrated that you kind of put that frustration onto anybody else who actually might know what they're doing. So I showed his existing marketing collateral to other doctors, which was a referral source. I got feedback. I showed him why the name was costing him. And then I did some groundwork. I used my process to come up with all the words that mattered. And then we hosted, because it was Canada, we had a pizza party with beer at his clinic. I asked him to invite a bunch of his friends. I gave a mind map with all the elemental aspects of his brand. And it was his now wife who put together the words soul and science. And he became Soul Science. In 18 months, he increased his revenue by 130%. With a name change only.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a massive.
Yeah.
So that was the client that made me go, okay, I need to double down on this niche, because when good people aren't getting the attention they deserve, sometimes the name is the problem, and that's fixable.
Yep, definitely. That reminds me of two incidents I've been involved with. Recently, a friend of mine had a bit of a consulting business. He's now just gone full-time as CEO of a SaaS company, software as a service. But he had this consulting business, and I love the work that he did, but I could never pronounce the name of his consulting business because it was Latin. And I said, dude, no one gives a shit. I can never remember it, can never, tell people about it. And so he went and thought about it. And a few weeks later, he renamed to his name, instead of trying to use some fancy Latin word and be smart. And the other naming incident I remember is from 5 or 6 years ago. I was visiting a distillery over in Western Australia, where I'm actually heading this weekend, which I now sit on the board of, because of me saying to the then owner who just bought the distillery, I said, it's a shit name, the one you're buying. You've got to dump it. It means nothing, and it's got a bad reputation in the industry as well. It makes terrible spirits. But it was a terrible name. Anyway, that was the first time I met him, though I can be fairly blunt. And a few weeks later, he rang. I said, look, I'm sure you've got some marketing mates in your network. Just ask them. I'm not a marketing expert, but I'm pretty honest, and I don't think this is going to work. So he did. And a few weeks later, rang me and said, you're right. I spoke to 3 marketing mates, and they all said it was shit. So he renamed it pretty quickly.
So your friend, who has gone from a hard-to-pronounce Latin name to his own name, he might want to look at that again or not depending on, but he might, depending on his numbers.
Yeah.
So there was a really good study done by MIT, and MIT is one of the top universities in the world, and it was their business school. So Scott Stern and Jorge Guzman looked at why some startups succeeded and failed over a 10-year period in Silicon Valley. It's actually very hard to figure out why startups really succeed. But one of the things they looked at was names. And what they discovered was eponymous names named after the founder were 70% less likely to succeed.
Wow. That's pretty hard hitting.
Yeah. And because we associate that with it's a sole practice, it's just that one person, it sounds, so he might have the right name because of the mouthfeel of his name, and it might work. Like Tommy Hilfiger had George Lois, the marketing genius, in his pocket, and George made sure that he broke out as a viable entity, but that cost millions of dollars. So you just have to be very careful around naming your brand after yourself.
Yeah. Have you got any quirky examples of names that you absolutely love and absolutely hate you can share with the audience?
Yes,
Lessons?
I can, because I'm coming up to the year end where I'll do the best names and the worst names I've ever heard award.
Yep.
One of the best names, and I helped facilitate this name, was a company called Manrags, and they produced socks and underwear by subscription, starting for men, and then they went to women and families. And they knew that Man Rags wasn't the right name for them. Tina and Michael Ellis, a gorgeous couple doing such beautiful work, they were taking those materials, like worn socks, and upcycling them. And then they started getting fabric textiles from H&M, Salvos, Vinnie's, all those places to keep them out of landfill. They're saving 1 million tons of fabrics from landfill. So their new name is Upparel, Upparel.
I like that. And you came up.
It's a team effort. So I came up with the big idea of Up. And what I do is I facilitate naming. So sometimes I'm naming it for companies because they've got the budget. Sometimes with a startup, I did a special program for them, and I helped facilitate the process. So it was a combined effort. I knew Up had to be in the name, and they found a trademarkable name, and the name, the name is just so gorgeous. They won the Sustainability Retail Champion Year of the Award for Australia. So that's my favorite name of 2020. I've got another couple of favorites too that I've named, but I love Inkley, and there's another one I love called Jillian's, but I'll park those. I'll tell you the worst name of 2020. So the worst name of 2020 is Adani's rename. So Adani is a really problematic company internationally. They've got a track record of not caring for their people or the planet, right? They've got a terrible history. So because they've got such a bad reputation, they decided not to become a better company. They decided to stay who they are and just change their name to Bravis. Well, that's not okay. So in addition, I can't remember the exact Latin translation of Bravis, but it doesn't mean anything good. And they haven't changed who they are. So it's just like a tiger. Not that, I like tigers, don't get me wrong, but it's putting a new coat on a criminal.
They're
I shouldn't say that, an alleged criminal.
Yes, they're a big Indian company in Queensland doing a massive mining project, aren't they?
Well, yeah, and if you look at sort of the backstory, there have been criticisms around this organization for a while, and Australia is a beautiful country that I want it to be cared for well. You have some of the most stunning, crazy wildlife in the whole world, and I want companies to take care of you, like Apparel is doing. So when you see a company like Adani that's been criticized for good reason, simply using a new name to hide who they have been, that makes them win the worst name of the year award.
And what are your thoughts on businesses that shrink down to acronyms like Kentucky Fried Chicken, now KFC?
Look, if you've got $1 billion, you can do that. But if you don't have $1 billion, don't play the Scrabble game. It's hard to win.
Scrabble game, I like that. Yeah. And one thing you think people do really poorly in this area of naming, particularly their businesses?
Well, I almost want to do I might get nailed for the Adani thing. Can we do that Adani one again? The best and worst? Okay.
Yep. No worries.
So, okay, because I just got to be careful here, right? They've got bigger lawyers than I do. So you asked the question, what are my worst and favorite brand names? And my favorite has to be a Australian startup that went from Manrag, so they made socks and underwear for men, and then they branched out to women and kids, and they were taking those socks back. So it was a subscription company, but when those socks wore out, they would take them back and upcycle them into new textiles. They ended up getting contracts with H&M and Vinnie's and Salvos, saving so much waste from landfill. They are a gorgeous brand. So they came to me because they knew they needed a new name, and I facilitated a process. So sometimes I do the naming for companies, and sometimes I facilitate the process depending on where they are and the budget and all the rest of it. Their new name. So my favorite name of 2020 is Apparel, Upparel, because it's all about lifting up the good.
Love it.
I love that.
Yeah.
And my worst name of 2020 is Adani, which is a multinational company that has a history of problematic practices that have been damaging to the environment and people.
Yep.
You can look online and see that. They're alleged wrongdoings. I have to say alleged to keep myself in good tick.
Yep.
Instead of changing the culture and committing to practices that care for people and the planet and prosperity, they've chosen to just rename themselves, and that's a problem. Their new name is Bravis. So they are hiding problems that people are calling them out on by changing their name instead of changing their values. That's that in the naming world. That's not okay.
So you think it's a missed opportunity? They could have chosen a better name at the same time, also changing their culture, and they've chosen to go the other way.
Look, let's look at Patagonia. Patagonia is an honorable company. If we haven't figured out that our role for all of us is to make things better by making better things, we're missing the plot. We're all here to make the world better in some way. And business and brands, because we start the day with them, we brush our teeth, and we end our day with them, brushing our teeth, getting into branded sheets, what have you, brands can make an incredible difference. And your name is part of that story, but underneath that story is who you are every day and how you behave.
Yep.
Want to become the best manager you can be? Check out our Kick-Ass Manager course at growasmallbusiness.com. Do the course, then add your fellow managers for no extra cost. Join the 30%. 70% of people quit their job because of their manager.
Yeah, so do you have any other good examples to share with the audience?
I sure do. So there was a company called Phytologic, and they are one of Australia's oldest naturopathic companies. They make food, drinks that are good for you. They came to me because they'd invented a probiotic kombucha that was good for your gut health. And we're learning that the microbiome and well-being are deeply connected. But they had a name that couldn't get them into Woolies and Caltex and Gloria Jeans and all those different organizations. So they came to me in a panic, and I'll show you the bottle. I named them Belly Up.
Love it.
Because it boosts gut health.
Yep.
And they managed to get into Woolies and the Caltex, and they went from nobody would talk to them to, oh my gosh, that's fantastic, we want it.
Yeah, I mean, the power of the name. When I was CEO at Lark Distillery, we were spinning off so it's Australia's oldest craft single malt distillery, started in 1992, award-winning, great whiskey, but also in the end made a lot of different other spirits like vodka, rum, etc., and gin. And when I started there, we culled the range down to just keeping the whiskey and decided to keep the gin because it can be made and sold pretty much on day one, whereas whiskey, you got to wait 2 to 5, 6 years for it to mature. And it was a good cash cow. But we decided to give it a different name so it wasn't associated directly with the whiskey brand, which is the family name Lark. And so we went through a massive process. Unfortunately, we tried to do this ourselves internally. We did have a marketing consultant helping us, but we went through something like 7 names that we got to trademark, the trademark step before we walked away from them. We're really happy with the one we landed on, which is 40 Spotted, which is after the 40 Spotted pardalote here, a little bird here in Tasmania. But that was a painful process. I wish I had have met you before then. Well,
and that's what Ken Segal said. So Ken Segal named the iMac. He did the forward of my book, and he said, "I wish I'd met you months ago." Yeah. Like he said, "What I wish I met you. I wish I met you years ago."
Yeah.
So yes, I've got a process that works. I'm really proud of that because you don't want a team like yours or anybody else's to get stuck.
Yep.
In a moment where it should be actually smooth sailing.
Yep. Absolutely. And like, how long was the time frame for a process like this? Months?
I think you should hold back 4 weeks and just say, look, we need to give ourselves 4 weeks because you might have suppliers or partners, other people who touch the brand and you want their input and their ideas. You might have employees who are invested in an old name, and so you want to use this as a change management project and an engagement project to get their input and to train them on the neuroscience of attention, because the principles are the same for naming that breaks out and any messaging that you do that breaks out. So it really is an opportunity to shape culture and improve the skill set of your team so that they're wiser, stronger, braver going forward.
Yeah, definitely. One of my favorite marketing books is Positioning by Al Ries and Jack Trout, which started in the 1960s. I think they were writing articles in a leading marketing magazine in the USA, and that got a lot of traction, a lot of attention. It was very popular. They then turned it into that book called Positioning. And that was really powerful for my learning around marketing, just how when a consumer is looking at your product, they position that in your mind. So, for example, if Mercedes start making computers, it's incongruent to where they think that brand should be,
But if Nike made a hotel, you would know exactly what that hotel would be like.
Yes. Yep.
So yes, and that book is right beside me, Positioning, because I'm looking at that for my tagline. And you mentioned this one already. And so it's actually called, it wasn't Marty's book. The one I also liked was When They Zig, You Zag.
Right.
Simon Reynolds. So yes.
Simon Reynolds here in Australia, he did the controversial AIDS ad in the 1980s, I think, with this Grim Reaper bowling ball. Is that right?
I wasn't here then. I've only been here 8 years. I became an Australian citizen on July the 3rd.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was Simon Reynolds. Yeah, very big marketing person from the 90s, very successful. Yeah. We might move on to then, and one thing you think people do really poorly in this area of naming.
What people get wrong with naming is they use the like, don't like matrix.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not how the brain works. And what will happen is you'll see a bunch of people and they'll go, I don't like Apple as a name. I don't like Virgin as a name. I don't like, what's a Rolex? I don't like it. It doesn't matter whether somebody likes it or not. Does it pull focus? Does it cascade from the neuron perspective? Does it cascade into the kind of feeling that you want for your brand? And does it lead you to a story worth telling? So yeah, the thing they get wrong is they don't generate enough names. They get all they get all ego caught up on something they like, so they use the wrong process to decide.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love books and material that really back to the behavioral science of the way that consumers. One of my other favorite marketing books is Influence by Robert Cialdini. I'm not sure if you've read that one.
It's over there.
Oh, you got on the shelf too? I'm blown away.
Somewhere over there.
Some of his stories about, him being caught out by what he calls compliance officers, the power of words again, used in scripts, people on the phone or in person. That is a brilliant book.
Well, it sounds like you're the kind of leader who's a reader, and that makes you wiser, and that means you can serve your audience even better. So thank you for being that kind of leader.
Well, on that, are there any other professional development resources you'd recommend for people to read, apart from obviously your own book and Marty's book, Positioning by Jack Trout and Al Ries? Any other books you'd throw out there for them?
Well, I will hold up my book just so people know what that looks like.
We'll put all these in the show notes so people.
Yeah, great. And so this is Word Glue, Find Your $1 Million Brand Name. So I do want you to have that. I think Seth Godin's book, This is Marketing, is a really amazing resource because it looks at modern marketing.
Yep.
And modern marketing is empathy-based. You can't, as I said, outspend Coca-Cola. So you really need to figure out who are you serving. Simon Sinek says start with why, but you really got to start with who are you serving and what do they believe? Because when you meet your story with their beliefs, then you're getting happiness.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Seth Godin. He's written some great books.
Yeah, he's a genius in terms of the marketing world. So following his blog and reading his books. And, if you've got a small business, you can choose the 4 books that you're going to read as a business each year. And if you do that year after year, or 1 book a quarter, your practice, your business, how you serve, how you think will strengthen.
Totally. I'm a big advocate when I do coaching for CEOs that they build the habit, not just for themselves, but their management team and the wider team to invest even 1 hour a week in professional development, listening to a podcast or reading a book on a specific topic that you need to spot up on. I just think it's so valuable to continual learning. Yeah,
well, the CEOs that I know, they're listening to audiobooks every week. They're consuming at least a book a week. So they're 52 books smarter than their competition year over year over year.
Absolutely. All right, Louise, we're on to our final few questions here. What do you think is the hardest thing in naming?
I don't find it hard because I've got a process.
Yeah.
But if I've got a client who is like, I need a name now, they're not the right client for me.
Yeah.
So I can't help them. So I don't think there's anything hard. It's a process, and you just need to give namers the time to do their process.
Great. And favorite naming book, or in this area, apart from your own, obviously, the ones you've mentioned so far, which one would you recommend to read after your book?
I would recommend Jeremy Miller's book. He's another Canadian, and we're generous by nature. So what my book does is it gives you the methods of naming, and what Jeremy's book does, and it's called A Brand New Name, that gives you the team process. Mm-hmm. So I don't talk about, because he looks at agile workflows and how naming ties into that, which I think is a really unique way of looking at it. So his book and my book work beautifully together. Okay. I give you the methods, he gives you the team process.
So your book first, then his.
You can use them together, but my book it's designed so that you can generate names in 10 minutes or less.
Yep.
His book is not designed that way.
Right.
So his book is, okay, how do we do the team and how do we structure the 4 weeks? And I don't talk about that in depth.
Right.
Partly because I knew he was working on that book.
Right. And final question, what's one thing you'd say to a small business owner starting out about naming? What should they really hone in on or focus on?
Don't be afraid to rename if you started with the wrong name. You might feel like you've got a lot of brand equity built up on that name. But I worked with a company called Lee Gen, which is a consulting practice looking at wellness in the workplace around addictions. And they were really hesitant to change their name from Lee Gen, which is a portmanteau of the first two founders. And they changed their name to 360 Edge because they're on the edge, they're on the leading edge using research and practice, and they look 360, and that in the addictions field, that 360 model means something to them. So they doubled their income. They were really successful.
Wow.
They doubled their income and they've doubled their success because they've got a new name and a better story.
Great. That's really good advice. And that's a nice point, I guess, to end on is don't be afraid to rename. It's not as expensive as what you think, or it can be expensive if you don't do it. You're leaving a lot of value on the table.
Oh, yeah. The wrong name will cost you, and the right name will carry you where you need to go day after day after day.
Thanks for your time today, Louise. I think the audience get a lot of value from our chat today, and your area of expertise. Naming is a really powerful and important part of business, particularly small business, and I'm sure a lot of people will be getting into your book.
Well, I wrote the book so people could get the attention that they deserve, and thank you for having this conversation. You're a real asset to your audience.
Great. No worries.
That's it. Thanks for listening. Please leave a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. It means more small business owners will find our cast and help people with their business growth journey.